Just to remind you, for those of you that maybe aren't aware, we live stream this service, right? So I want to just say welcome to those of you who are watching online right now. Nice to have you as part of our congregation, and we actually add you as part of our church on every week, and it's just great to be able to have people live stream. Not that we want you to stay home in your pajamas or anything like that, but if you're not feeling 100% and you decide that, you're going to not share your cold with someone else, you can stay home and still watch the service and be a part of it. I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And you'd be surprised how many parts of the world people are dialing in and watching the service, which is really exciting to think that we are able to live stream to all parts of the world. We've been talking about unlikely heroes, and if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about those people, especially in the Bible, who end up being heroes that we would not have typically have thought of as a hero. When we think of a hero, we have certain, understandings and characterizations of what a hero looks like. Some grand feat and exciting kind of moment when they did something that saved many lives, et cetera, but we're using, a couple of different definitions, and I want to put them up again just to remind you about the kind of definitions we were talking about when it comes to a hero. A person who is carrying a significant life burden, but who carries it with faith, dignity, integrity, and perpetual hope. There are people in your life right now that are carrying an incredible burden. And yet, unless you know them personally, unless you know what they're really going through, they are carrying it with so much dignity and faith and hope in Jesus that, it's heroic. You kind of look at them and you say, you know what, if anyone else would be carrying what you carried, they would just, they would die. They just couldn't do it. They would be so hard-pressed and so victimized by the situation. And people like that, I tell you, as a pastor, I see people like this all the time. They tell me, and I go, this is what you're carrying in your life. And they say, yes, but God has given me the strength. Jesus is still my hope. I'm carrying, it's what it is. How many times you've heard people say, it is what it is. Okay? And they're just carrying it with so much dignity, so much faith. And it's not like, we want to carry each other's burdens as people of God, right? But they don't want to burden other people. It's like, you have enough stuff, right? Thanks for caring. Thanks for praying, But they have this sort of ability to just manage it. And then when it gets over, when it starts to spill over, that's when they reach out. And we want people reaching out and all that stuff. But there's just something about people who sort of, take it on in such a way, and they say, I've given it to God, and God is the one who's kind of managing this thing for me. And it's heroic. In many ways, it's heroic. Okay? And the second definition I want to give us is an ordinary person whom God uses for extraordinary results. We've talked about a couple of people already in the sermon series, and if Ruth and Rahab, if you had pegged those two women in their time frame, in their situation, and what they accomplished, you would never have thought of them as being hero potential at all. And yet they grace the pages of the Bible because of decisions that they made to make a difference. When they were one person and they stood up as one person and they made such a difference in the life of the people in the Bible at that time, that there they are gracing the pages of the Bible for us to take lessons from. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And the story today is equally as intriguing. When we talk about the Jewish people, for instance, and I was to say to you, what Holocaust do you think of when you think about the Jewish people? Now, for most of you, to hear the term, Jewish nation, and Holocaust, right away you're going to go to World War II. That's where we instinctively go. But did you know in the life cycle of the Israelite nation that there were many times that they were targeted for annihilation? One of those times was in about 480 BC when they were, had been captured by the Babylonians. The Babylonian Empire had been beaten by the Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire had, they had brought all the Jewish people out of Israel into slavery in Persia. And the first Persian king said, I'll let you go back and start building your city again. But they had been in captivity for so long that a majority of the Jewish people stayed in Persia, stayed in that part of the world. And they had become very comfortable there. And they had been living there. And they were a displaced people in that part of the world. And the story we're looking at today is about a young girl. By the way, we're told she was a beautiful young girl. She was so beautiful, in fact, that the king of Persia, Xerxes who we think is Xerxes at the time, made her his queen in a kind of beauty pageant contest out of the book. And her name is Esther. And her name means star. Okay? So here is Esther, who, by the way, lost her parents very young. And she was kind of not formally adopted, but she was in the care of her cousin, a man named Mordecai. And Mordecai was the person who was in charge of Esther, and she ends up elevating in the ranks because she becomes the queen. Okay? But she hides from the king that she has a Jewish heritage. And the second in command at that time was a man named Haman. Haman hated the Jews. For whatever reason, in fact, Mordecai had a run-in with him at some point as well. And what ended up happening was Haman tricked the king to put out a decree on a particular day, did a lottery kind of thing, on a particular day, that all the Jewish people would be killed on this particular day. Now, in that day and age, when the king gave a decree, you could not revoke it. When he put his insignia on the decree, he could not take it back. It became law, embedded in law. So Haman had somehow tricked the king to sign this decree, to put his insignia on it, and the Jewish people were now slated for annihilation, a type of Holocaust, something we can't fathom in our day and age, even though it happens still, even in this modern world. But unbeknownst to the king, Esther is Jewish. She has not revealed that to the king as of yet. And then we're going to look at a conversation in the book of Esther between Esther and Mordecai. And this is where we're going to talk about heroic moments. Okay? So, in chapter 4, verse 11 to 17, it says this: all the king's officials and even in the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. Now, this is a custom of the king. You just couldn't barge into the throne room and say, hey, buddy, I need to talk. Okay? You just didn't do that. And if the king was upset with the fact that you entered into his presence without being invited, your head came off. Okay? Simple as that. Simple as that. So, they have gotten the decree, and Esther knows that she's got to do something. But she's afraid to go into the presence of the king because the king could potentially kill her. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. Imagine that. Hubby hasn't called you for 30 days. Okay. Maybe it's just me, but I think there's a problem there, right? Okay. Hope he hasn't called me in 30 days. All right? So Hathachah gave Esther's message to Mordecai. So they're changing letters, okay? This is what Esther has said, to Mordecai. He hasn't called me in 30 days. I just can't barge in and tell him, guess what? This decree is wrong. In fact, I'm the very person you want to kill, okay? This is Mordecai's response back to Esther. This is Mordecai's. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Now, if you've been in the Bible at all, in any length of time, you've probably come across this portion of Esther, because this is the portion that everybody talks about. Now, I got to tell you something. There's a big fight between scholars on this particular passage, right? Is Mordecai honestly believing that God is going to send someone, or is Mordecai more being devious at this point in time and forcing Esther into a corner? And many scholars believe that he's forcing her into a corner because there's no other option, there's no other choice. In fact, why would he say that her family is going to get killed? Don't think you're going to escape whatever's coming. You either, have to do something, or else we're all doomed. Now, I don't know about you, but that's forced heroics, isn't it? What are you going to do? Your entire people are counting on you at this particular time. Now, you've got two options, right? Maybe she could run. He hasn't heard, she hasn't heard from him in 30 days. Maybe he won't notice for another 30 days if she runs. Who knows? If he's like most guys, no. Yeah. All right? So this is an incredible passage where Mordecai is straight on telling her she's got a choice to make. And everything is counting on you. And this is really tough. Now, you have to think at this time and in this period that the queen's going to have some kind of say. But there's nothing in the text, by the way, that tells us that Esther ever used her position, to gain favor. It's never been demonstrated by that. She's been humbly in his service, is what has been demonstrated through this entire book. And this is really, really important. Like, she hasn't intentionally fathered a son, for instance, like birthed a son, in order that she would gain favor with him. Okay? She hasn't played that kind of political thing at all. She has just served him as best as she could, which is a hugely important component of all of this. Okay? And we don't get this sense of why me. Sometimes we get put in a position and the first thing out of our mouths is why me? Why does all of this count on me? She doesn't say anything like, what about the priest? Can't you get the priest of Yahweh to come and do something? Okay, what about the prophets? The prophets are around at this time. Why don't you get one of them to do something? Because they're the ones, the harbingers of God and bring the judgment and the thing before the king. They could ask for a formal audience. What would be more in keeping with decorum than to ask for a formal audience and to tell the king that he's been duped by his second in command? Because the second in command has a hatred for the Jewish people. In fact, Haman has built a special gallows so he can watch Mordecai hang when the day comes. It's incredible, the story. Full of a lot of intrigue. And by the way, you don't have to invent, a Hollywood version of the story. If Hollywood was to take this story and put it on the screen and faithful to the text, it has more intrigue and more, than you can possibly imagine. Faithful to the text. Here is Esther's response to what Mordecai says. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa, which is the capital of Persia at this time, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. Now, in Jewish tradition, 1 day fast is enough. The fact that they're asking for a 3-day fast tells you the seriousness of what's about to go down. Okay? My maids and I will do the same, and then, though it is against the law, I will go in, see the king, and if I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Beautiful story. What do you think happens? And by the way, do you know that the book of Esther does not mention God at all? In fact, the book of Esther is written in a way that lets you know that God is in the background orchestrating all of these events as it goes. And it's a beautiful picture. And in fact, for Esther to say that she's going to fast tells you that she has a faith and a belief, and it tells you that she is, because in that day and age, to pray and to fast is to pray and to fast to Yahweh for Jewish people. It's very specific, and it's very directed, and she's yielding her entire future on whether Yahweh is going to save her, give her favor, or not. And it's absolutely a moment where you're going into, I can't imagine myself that you have this moment where you're going to see the most powerful person imaginable, and if he just doesn't like you, or you got him on a bad day, or you have him in a bad mood, at the wrong, it's the end of your life. And if your life ends, what is hanging in the balance is the lives of so many other tens of thousands of people. So it's vitally important that at least the king shows you favor. And that's what she's praying for. At the very least, that the king will hear her. Now, you have to read the story. She puts on these feasts and all this kind of stuff. And what's interesting about the book of Esther, everything is built around a feast. I think there's 8 feasts in the book of Esther, 8 of them. The whole book is designed around all these feasts. And here she is fasting. It's absolutely the contrast of what is going on in that particular book. Here are the quick lessons out of this. Position always has a purpose. When it comes to the sovereignty of God, position always has a purpose. Mordecai recognizes this. He said, maybe you've been made queen of all the other beautiful women that's in his harem, and he elevates you. Of all the people, maybe God has put you in the place just such for a time as this. And maybe this position that you've been given has a purpose. Maybe it's something that God has orchestrated, that the time is now, and you cannot deny it. That you cannot deny that this is what is happening. Here's the second thing that sort of comes out of this passage that I can't help but wonder about. How many opportunities are missed because of our indifference or our comfort, while so many others are sort of in peril? Mordecai alludes to this and stuff like that. Don't think that just because you're in the palace, don't think that just because you're the queen, you are going to miss, the Holocaust that is coming to your people. You and your family, whatever that family is at this point in time, are going to be targets as well. In fact, it's a moment for you to stand up and say, what is my identity? Is my identity a Persian person now? And I'm going to just kind of look the other way when it comes to my people? Or am I going to stand with my people and say, guess what? I'm with them. You can't do this. This isn't proper. But I think a big enemy to us becoming heroes sometimes, or even heroic in our own lives, is the indifference that we can have to what is going on, or even our level of comfort. We don't like being uncomfortable. We don't like messy lives. We don't like messy situations. And sometimes we have to stand up because we're forced to stand up. I'm going to allude to this a little bit later because I think this particular section has such an important lesson for the modern church, to be honest. Okay? Number 3. Purpose. Every purpose has a timeline. Every purpose has a timeline. Right? The time is now. The time is here. You just can't ignore that God has put you in this position, and you just can't be doing nothing for a long period of time. God at some point is going to call you to make a stand and to take a stand. What's that saying? I got the quote here. Edmund Burke. This is the next point. I want to talk about this next point. The courage of one will always affect the outcome of many. Isn't that true over the history of time? The courage of one person, will almost always affect the outcome of many. Edward Burke wrote this, and I think if I read this correctly, it has been considered the most popular quote ever. Like a lot of times when people say what's the most popular quote, this is the quote that many of them say should be number 1. Right? Here it is. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I don't know about you, but that's the proverbial 2x4 in the forehead, right? Esther is in this position where her courage has to take over. And if she dies, she dies. She's made that kind of recognition of what has to happen next. What has to happen next. Here's the last thing. Esther demonstrates the beauty and conviction of faith. When everyone else was looking at Esther because of her body and face, her true beauty is in her courage and her conviction and her faith in Yahweh. That's where her true strength really lies. That she had a faith in Yahweh, that she put her life on the line. And it was powerful. And the story ends kind of beautifully too. If you know anything about the book of Esther, she ends up, revealing to the king through, a feast that she put on. And the king responds favorably. In fact, in the midst of all of it, through some scenario, the king finds out that he's been tricked by his second in command, Haman. Okay? But he can't undo the edict that he's been given, even though he's been duped by this man that he should have trusted, who is now going to want to annihilate all these people in his kingdom. And it's even going to mean the demise of his queen. So he cleverly allows the Jewish people as part of this thing. The day comes, the day when they're going to annihilate all the Jewish people. And what the king allows is for the Jewish people to defend themselves. And everything kind of works out okay. But you know, Haman, the mastermind of all of this, ends up getting hung on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Amen. Be careful how upset you make the king. Hey, that was a life lesson I didn't think was going to be in this, right? Be careful how you upset the king. Now this is, God over the centuries has used these individuals in critical moments and in critical places to change the direction of history and to fulfill his plan and purpose. The Jewish people, for all intents and purposes, should have been annihilated at this particular time, but they weren't. Because one woman stood up and said, you know what? If it's my life, better my life than all the other lives. Now, do you know why the book of Esther is in the Bible? It's to explain the reason for the Feast of Purim, which the Jewish people celebrate. And the Feast of Purim is a feast that got instituted to celebrate how Esther saved the people of Israel at this time. And it's kind of like the Jewish Mardi Gras. That's what I've been told. I've been told it's a kind of like the version of a Jewish Mardi Gras. And I guess every time Mordecai's name gets mentioned when they read the text, everybody goes, yay! And they cheer and all this stuff. And every time Haman's name is, they all go boo. And all that. So, you got to be part of it to kind of enjoy it. But that's even to this day. They celebrate the Feast of Purim to celebrate the fact that God intervened through a young woman and made all the difference in the world. Now, I can't help but talk about the parallels of this in our modern day. Because, if you love the Church of Jesus Christ, if you love the kingdom of God, if you have any interest in the church, you know that the church is under incredible attack today. Incredible attack. And there are lots of people. In fact, I think the first Satanist sermon is today in Ottawa. A public black mass, I think, is happening today. So there are these movements that are mimicking the church, and they're having an unbaptism, I think, if I remember right, which is you can revert your baptism or something like that. And the first service I hear is packed. First service is packed, is what that's what I read. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, okay? But that's what I've read. So, we need to pray, okay? Now some of you know I have a personal website and I've been blogging for quite a few years. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a blog and it was entitled, 5 Signs of Persecution and Why Canadian Christians Should Be Worried. That has, over and above almost anything else, been the most popular blog that I've written. And there isn't a day go by that somebody somewhere around the world doesn't connect to that blog. Which really shocked me. Because I wrote that blog after I taught a course at the seminary on the book of Acts. And in the class, we started talking about persecution. What does it look like? And all this stuff. And as the class and all of us in the classroom started realizing that a lot of the things that begin the seeds of persecution in Canada, the seeds of persecution in the book of Acts is starting to show up in Canada. Now, some of you are going to think that's absolutely crazy, right? But all the seeds of persecution have already all started in Canada. It might never get to the point where we're led out into the street and, heads chopped off and all that kind of stuff. But the signs of persecution are already being formulated in this beautiful country we call Canada. Just because we call ourselves Christian. Okay? Right? And that's the lesson, are we courageous to stand up when it comes? Are we willing to say, this is the caricature you have of God, or this is the caricature you have of the church? That's not necessarily what the church is about. That's not necessarily what God is like, Because who knows? It may just take one of us to stand up and for God to use you, God to use me, to make all the difference in the world. Because the cycle that we see in the book of Esther has happened time and time and time again. And somewhere in history, God has raised up an individual, God has raised up a church, God has raised up a people that made all the difference in the world. All I'm asking you is not to be ashamed to be a follower of Jesus. Can we just do that? And be like Esther, when it's necessary, at least to stand up and say, I am one of them. And imagine what God can do when he uses you in that way. Okay? I'm so heartbroken. I am so heartbroken by the caricatures we have in our culture of the church and of God. Because 99% of the time when people say to me, God is this, they are dead wrong. Or it's only a very, very small piece of the puzzle. Or when they say the church is all about, almost 99% of the time, they are dead wrong. And that's so hurtful when we see these caricatures actually winning the day as to what it is that they're promoting about the church or about God. And that's too bad. So, can we just be a little heroic for the sake of the kingdom of God? Amen?